In this video, I'm looking at more cases where appeal inspectors assess competing elevations of corner houses. This street is aligned north-south, and most of the houses have front doors facing the street. The exception is the appellant property, with an east-west ridgeline and an entrance door facing south. The appellant applied for a Lawful Development Certificate, or LDC, to erect a dormer window on the north-facing elevation. The council refused the application. On appeal, the inspector considered whether the east or the south elevation should be designated as the principal elevation. The east-facing elevation is a fairly narrow and plain gable end which fronts the road. The south-facing elevation is very much wider and fronts a shared driveway. Architecturally, the main features comprise the entrance door and a number of windows arranged in a traditional symmetrical design. The curve of the road at this point means that this elevation is highly prominent, and it's concluded that this is the principal elevation. As the proposed dormer will be on the rear roof slope, it will not project in front of the principal elevation. The appeal was allowed. This corner property has a narrow south elevation and a wider east elevation. The appellant applied for an LDC to erect two dormers on the east elevation and to relocate the main entrance door from south to east. At the time, the south elevation was a mirror image of the neighbouring property, with door and window at ground level, as you see here. The appellant considered the south-facing elevation to be the principal elevation. The council rejected the application, saying the east-facing elevation was the principal elevation. The council justified their selection of the principal elevation by referring to the intended relocation of the front door to the east elevation, and secondly, the possible future removal of the fence at the side, which was largely screening the lower half of the east elevation. They argued that the removal of the fence would increase the visual impact of that elevation. Upon appeal, the inspector rejected the council's reasons for selecting the east elevation as the principal elevation. The point was made that the principal elevation is decided at the time of the application and is not concerned with what might happen in the future. The inspector noted that the south elevation featured the front door and a small porch. Although the east elevation was wider, the road overlooked by the south elevation was wider, giving the south elevation a more prominent visual impact. The inspector concluded that the south elevation was the principal elevation and that the appeal should be allowed. It's interesting to consider which elevation might be assigned as the principal elevation if the householder were to apply for an LDC today. For example, an application to erect a porch on the east elevation would be considered under Class D of the PDO. As the property has to be assessed at the time of the application, it's likely that the east elevation would be declared to be the principal elevation. However, the application would fail as the proposed porch would be less than 2 meters from the curtilage boundary. Alternatively, an application to add a single-story side extension would be considered under Class A of the PDO. This class has a limitation relating to the principal elevation of the original dwelling house. As the original dwelling house had the front door on the south elevation, it's likely that the south elevation would be declared to be the principal elevation for this particular application. The proposal could then become a 2-story rear extension, subject to the 3-meter limitation. Consider this house with a northwest facing, that's the gable end elevation, and a southwest facing with an entrance door elevation. The appellant applied for an LDC to erect a dormer window on the southwest elevation, claiming the northwest elevation was the principal elevation. The council rejected the application, arguing that the longer southwest elevation was the principal elevation. Upon appeal, the inspector noted both elevations fronted a highway, and in terms of architecture, the northwest elevation featured a bedroom window plus 2 small ground floor windows. But the inspector considered this elevation to be bland and without significant architectural features. In contrast, the inspector considered the front door and canopy to be distinctive features of the southwest elevation, and this was duly assigned as the principal elevation. Personally, I'm not persuaded for the following reasons. The waste pipes and tiny windows on the southwest elevation are typical of a side elevation, and we've heard an inspector on previous cases say this. Also, the southwest elevation is half hidden, and the long-range views are limited for the southwest elevation. In favour of the northwest elevation being the principal elevation are the decorative barge boards, the greater width, and the fact that the first-time visitors would see the northwest elevation when they first approached the property. I don't think that it's obvious which elevation is the principal elevation in this case, and perhaps more weight should be given to the householder's opinion. What do you think? This property has a thin northwest elevation and a wider southwest elevation. The appellant applied for an LDC for a conservatory to the rear of the property. This was rejected by the council. The inspector considered the principal elevation to be the southwest elevation as it featured the front door, windows with decorative sills, and it faced an area of landscaped open space. In addition, it faced the same way as 3 neighbouring houses to the east. There was no mention of the attributes of the northwest elevation from the inspector. In my opinion, this seems to be a one-sided appraisal. These are some of the features that could have been mentioned by the inspector. The northwest elevation provides a gateway to the main entrance door, and the northwest elevation also has windows and decorative sills. The northwest elevation includes a garage door and faces an attractive area of landscaped open space that has a children's playground. It also faces the same way as 3 neighbouring houses to the north, which are much closer than the houses mentioned by the inspector. The inspector could have gone further and mentioned that the northwest elevation fronts the main highway serving the house, providing the address and postcode for the house. The elevation also provides the only visitor and vehicle access for the occupants and visitors. It's the public face of the property. It's where the first-time visitor is drawn. It's the elevation that is clearly visible to the public. My personal view is that the inspector took a very narrow view of the criteria available to assess the principal elevation. Also, where the decision is finally balanced, I don't think that the decision should then just be down to the inspector's personal preference. The householder should be given the benefit of the doubt. This can be easily and consistently executed by giving more weight to the householder's view. My view, if you haven't gathered by now, is that the appeal should have succeeded. Am I the only one who thinks this? Add a comment below if you want to agree or disagree with me. If you're thinking of pressing the like or subscribe buttons, thank you. Next week, I'm looking at a few house enlargements that are expanding towards the highway. Thanks for watching. See you next week.